Well, the stage is set. This time in Japan's Hiroshima city, the three-day G7 summit is set to begin in a short while from now. What's expected to dominate the agenda is the Russia-Ukraine war and China's so-called coercive economic politics. The leaders of the group of 7 nations have already arrived for the summit. These are Joe Biden, Rishi Sunak, Justin Trudeau, Olaf Scholz, Giorgia Meloni, Fumio Kishida and Emmanuel Macron. They have already begun their bilaterals and are getting ready for the first session of the summit, which is set to begin in just a few hours from now. However, before the first session of the summit begins, the G7 leaders are visiting the Hiroshima Peace Memorial and paying their respects to the victims of the atomic bomb tragedy of 1945. The leaders were met by the Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida at the Memorial Park, also called the Atomic Bomb Dome. Let's take a look at the bilaterals that have taken place so far. Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida held talks with his Italian counterpart Giorgia Meloni ahead of the start of the G7 Leaders Summit. Kishida also held delegation-level talks with French President Emmanuel Macron, who arrived in Hiroshima on Friday morning. Fumio Kishida and U.S. President Joe Biden also held bilateral talks ahead of the G7 summit. UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak and Japanese counterpart Fumio Kishida announced the signing of the Hiroshima Accords ahead of the opening day of the summit. This includes a semiconductor supply chain amid an increasingly competitive market.
How are you? Very good to see you. Thank you for having me.
今日も日との間において日英関係をより進展させるための有益な議論を行い、そして日英広島アコードを発出することによって両国の幅広い協力を示したいと思っています。
Britain has unveiled new sanctions against Russia's mineral sector, targeting imports of diamonds as well as aluminum, copper and nickel in a bid to choke Moscow's ability to fund the war in Ukraine. Britain is also targeting an additional 86 people and companies from Putin's military-industrial complex. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen also arrived in Hiroshima on Thursday. European Council President Charles Michel has said the G7 bloc will target the lucrative trade in Russian diamonds as part of a renewed push to hamper Moscow's war effort. Ahead of the G7, the United States revealed they will impose new significant sanctions targeting Russia's war machine. As per the U.S. official, the G7 bloc wants to disrupt Russian war supplies, close evasion loopholes and further reduce reliance on Russian energy. On a historic occasion, Brazilian President Lula da Silva also arrived in Hiroshima mere hours ago. Brazil has been invited to the G7 meeting after a long interval of 14 years. And for more on this, we are now being joined by our principal diplomatic correspondent, Sitan Sibol, live from Hiroshima. Sitan, good to see you again. Probably you can tell us the symbolism of this summit being held at the Peace Memorial Park.
Well, Hiroshima is a city that was devastated because of the atomic bomb in 1945, and since then this city has become a city of peace, sending out a message of a world free of nuclear weapons. And this time also it is no different. We know that the summit begins just in few hours, and before that the leaders of the G7 countries visited the Hiroshima Peace Memorial, paid their homage. We know that this is the second time that a sitting US president is in the city as well. The first was Barack Obama, and this time of course the President Biden is present here. But essentially while there is of course this backdrop of how war devastates everything, the focus is on contemporary challenges, on worries over Russia-Ukraine conflict, the Chinese aggressiveness in the region, the North Korean missile test as well. So these will be topping the priority. Focus, of course, from the Japanese side will be on how they can make sure that there can be consensus on issues like clean technology, climate change and artificial intelligence. That remains another top priority at this year's summit.
Well, Siddhan Sibal, probably you can tell us, this summit never lack protests. Have you managed to talk to some of the protesters at this year's Hiroshima summit? And what are they saying?
Well, we managed to speak with one lone protester in front of the place where I'm standing. I'm standing in front of the International Media Center, where world's media has descended to give minute-by-minute detail of this mega summit. I'm calling it mega because it's just not 7 leaders. It's also the invited leaders. The Japanese side has invited a whole host of countries, including India. But talking about the protester, one lone protester, he, of course, sending out a message that the world should be free of nuclear weapons, and that of course remains his focus. We also spoke to a number of officials, including the spokesperson of the Japanese Foreign Ministry, who told us that focus from the Japanese side will be on coming out with creative methods of dealing with the current global challenges. We know that the Japanese side is keen, as the chair of the G7, they can do their bit when it comes to resolving issues, especially when it comes to the ongoing conflict in Europe.
Siddhan Sibal, finally, probably you can tell us, what should we expect on the first plenary of this 3-day summit?
Well, the first plenary will start in a short while from now, and focus will be on current contemporary challenges, especially Russia-Ukraine conflict. This is the first time here since the leaders arrived yesterday that the leaders will be together in same room, and of course there will be informal conversations, formal conversations as well. And we have seen in the past that how these conversations have been productive for the bilateral relationship of these leaders. Yesterday we saw the bilateral component of this entire summit, where the Japanese Prime Minister not only welcomed the G7 leaders but held bilateral talks. Their readouts were issued late yesterday night, and the readouts had one specific point. In fact, 2 specific points. One, of course, the Russia-Ukraine conflict, and second was the mention of China, the challenges coming from China. So, no points guessing. So, when the first plenary begins, focus will be on how there can be a conversation around challenges regarding China and also energy security.
Live from Hiroshima, Japan, our principal diplomatic correspondent, Siddhan Sibal, thank you. WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.